The marble floors of the courthouse echoed with sharp footsteps, confident voices, and quiet scorn. Men in expensive suits walked with entitlement. Women in sleek heels tapped across the halls like they owned the air around them. Among them stood a woman in a modest cream-colored outfit, her dupatta draped gracefully, hands clutching a worn folder. She looked like she did not belong not to them, not to this elite world where power was displayed in accessories and arrogance. She stood quietly near the courtroom door, not speaking, not fidgeting, just waiting. Her presence, though quiet, seemed to disturb something in the air. A junior lawyer smirked and nudged his colleague. "Looks like someone's housemaid got lost on her way to the family court." More laughter, soft but sharp. A female. Intern walked past her, gave her a once-over, and rolled her eyes. "Sweetheart, the cafeteria is that way?" Still, the woman said nothing. She did not flinch. She did not argue. Her eyes, dark and steady, remained fixed on the courtroom door. Security barely glanced at her. Clerks brushed by without acknowledgement. She was invisible to everyone, except the guard who tried to redirect her away from the chamber. "Ma'am," he said, gesturing politely, "this area is for attorneys and family members of court officials. You may want to wait in the general gallery." She nodded once, her voice soft. "I will wait here." The guard hesitated, but something about her calmness, her dignity, made him pause. He walked away without pressing further. Inside the courtroom, chatter buzzed as people waited for the judge to arrive. The Chief Justice of the District Court was known for his no-nonsense rulings, his brilliance and his strict command of the room. No one dared test him. No one questioned his authority. Back outside, the woman's name was still unknown to those around her. They only saw what they wanted to see. What they saw was someone who did not fit their image of power, but their amusement was about to curdle into shame. Because when the chamber doors finally opened and the courtroom stood as the Chief Justice entered, robes flowing, presence unmistakable, he did not look at the lawyers or the clerks. First he looked at her and he smiled, not out of formality, but with love, with recognition, and suddenly, the entire courtroom would see her for who she truly was, not just a quiet woman standing alone, but the heart and soul of the most powerful man in the building, and the silence that followed would be louder than all their laughter as the heavy doors shut behind him. The courtroom settled into silence. The Chief Justice took his seat at the elevated bench. His presence changed the air sharp, focused, absolute. Lawyers who were laughing only moments ago straightened their backs. Their confidence turned into caution. But the woman standing just outside the doorway remained the same, moved, untouched by the shifting energy in the room. Inside, the docket began. Motions were argued, cases were called, objections raised, but the judge's eyes kept drifting subtly, deliberately toward the entrance. And then finally, he turned to the court clerk and said calmly, "Please bring in my guest." The words floated over the courtroom like a puzzle no one could solve. The clerk looked confused. "Sir, she has been waiting outside long enough," the Chief Justice replied, his voice firm but kind. "Bring in my wife." A wave of shock passed through the room. Heads snapped toward the doorway. The woman in the plain cream dress, the one they mocked and dismissed, stepped through the threshold. She did not walk in hurriedly. She did not shrink under the weight of attention. She moved with grace, like she had walked these halls 1,000 times before. And maybe she had. The whispers started immediately. "That's his wife. She is the Chief Justice's wife. But she looks..." Exactly, she looked nothing like what they had expected, because they had built their expectations on shoes and silk, not on strength and quiet dignity. The judge stood from the bench, a gesture he never made for anyone, and walked down the steps to greet her. He took her hand in his, kissed it gently, and said, "You waited too long, my love. You should have come inside sooner." And in that moment, the courtroom forgot every title, every suit, every layer of arrogance that had filled the air, because all anyone could see was a woman who had been underestimated by everyone except the man who mattered most. She sat beside him on the bench, not in the gallery, and the courtroom shifted again. This was not just a visit. This was not ceremonial. This was personal. The Chief Justice resumed the hearing, but the energy in the room was no longer the same. Those who had chuckled earlier now found it difficult to meet her eyes. The attorneys, who had stood so tall now, adjusted their collars, suddenly unsure of themselves. But she remained calm, serene even, as if the attention meant nothing to her, because it truly did not. She was not here for their acceptance. She had lived long enough beside power to know that the loudest voices often revealed the smallest hearts, and she remembered each glance, each smirk from earlier in the hallway, not with bitterness but with quiet clarity. her husband's justice. Amr spoke with authority, but with her at his side, there was a new tone in his voice, warmer, more grounded, like she reminded him why he had chosen this life of order and justice in the first place. During a short recess, the judge stepped out of chambers with her. He held the door for her. Staff who had ignored her in the morning now greeted her with trembling respect. Some offered compliments they had not earned. Others avoided her gaze altogether, hiding behind papers and hallway corners. And yet, she said nothing about their behavior. No smugness, no revenge. Instead, when one of the junior clerks, the same who had laughed, approached awkwardly and said, I did not realize," she simply replied, "that is often the case. People rarely realize who someone is when they only look at the surface." Then she walked past him with the same calm grace as before, and that single sentence lingered in the air, heavier than any lecture the judge could have given. Back inside the courtroom, the second half of the day began. The air, once casual and careless, was now reverent. Every voice was measured, every argument precise. No one dared interrupt, not just because of the Chief Justice, but because of her. Her quiet presence on the bench had become a mirror. Everyone was now seeing themselves reflected back, assumptions and all. One attorney, known for his arrogance and showmanship, found himself fumbling through his notes. Another kept glancing toward her, visibly uncomfortable, as if hoping she would forget the way he had dismissed her earlier in the corridor. But she did not forget. She simply forgave. As the proceedings continued, something extraordinary began to unfold. During a particularly heated debate over a constitutional technicality, the Chief Justice paused and turned to her. "What do you think?" he asked gently, in front of everyone. A hush swept through the courtroom. No one had ever seen the Chief Justice consult anyone, let alone someone they had assumed was a bystander, or worse, an outsider. She did not hesitate. Precedent would favor a narrow interpretation, she said clearly. But justice, not just legality, must always guide the outcome. Her words settled into the room like sunlight filtering through a storm. The Chief Justice nodded slowly. Well said. Lawyers did not know where to look. Some stared at their shoes. Others looked at her with new eyes, searching for something they had missed: intellect, dignity, depth, because it was all there. It had been there from the start. They had just never bothered to look beyond the simple scarf, the modest shoes. The quiet demeanor. What they had mistaken for smallness was restraint. What they had mocked as simplicity was depth. Asterisk, and the realization hit like a gavel cracking down. They had misjudged her hand now. They were witnessing her in her truth. The afternoon wore on, whispers started to ripple through the building. Court staff who had missed the moment earlier now peeked through doorways or pretended to pass by just to catch a glimpse of the woman they had dismissed. Rumors spread fast, not because she was scandalous, but because she had shattered every assumption with quiet dignity. The gallery, once restless, sat with unusual discipline. Even the stenographer who had once smirked when she asked for directions now typed with laser focus, sneaking occasional glances at her with a mix of shame and admiration. A reporter in the back, originally assigned to cover a dry procedural issue, began writing a different story, one not just about legal precedent, but about perception, justice, and the quiet power of presence. Then came the moment that would be remembered long after that day. A young law student scheduled to observe court proceedings rose during the public comment portion. She clutched her notepad, trembling slightly, and addressed the room. "I came here to study law, but today, I think I learned something greater. I saw how easy it is to look at someone and think they are less, and I saw how wrong we can be." She turned to the woman on the bench. "Thank you for showing me that grace is louder than judgment." A soft murmur of agreement echoed through the room. Even the most hardened attorneys could not look away, and still, she said nothing. She simply offered a small, respectful nod to the student, then folded her hands in her lap, because that was all it took. One gesture, one truth. And the entire courtroom was changed. The session finally drew to a close. The Chief Justice rose, delivering the final ruling with the precision and gravitas that had made him a legend in legal circles. But this time, all eyes were not just on him. They were on the woman beside him, the one who had said so little, yet changed so much. When the gavel fell, people did not leap to their feet the way they usually did. They stood slowly, thoughtfully, many of them glancing once more in her direction. Not out of curiosity now, but out of respect. As the Chief Justice gathered his notes, he turned to her with the quiet ease of a man deeply proud. "Ready?" he asked like he always did. She smiled, stood, and slipped her hand into his. Together, they stepped down from the bench, not as a powerful judge and his overlooked wife, but as equals. As a woman whose worth had been hidden in plain sight, now finally seen. Outside, the reporters swarmed. Flashbulbs popped. Microphones stretched forward with rapid questions about legal implications and judicial insight. But one question broke through the noise. "Ma'am, how did it feel being judged before anyone knew who you were?" She paused, thoughtful. Then she said quietly, "It does not matter what they think when you enter. It only matters who you are when you leave." Her words went viral by the next morning. Not because they were dramatic, but because they were true. In the weeks that followed, court staff began treating every visitor differently. Not out of fear, but out of newfound humility. The law school that sent interns to the courthouse added her quote to a lecture about ethics. And the article the reporter had written, "The Woman in the Waiting Room Who Changed the Courtroom," became the most treed piece that month. But she never sought credit. She did not start a foundation. She did not post a speech online. Simply returned to court beside her husband, carrying her quiet presence like armor, her grace like a sword. And those who had once laughed, they now stood every time she entered. Not because she demanded it, but because, after witnessing the strength behind her silence, they understood. True authority does not always wear a robe. Sometimes it just wears a simple scarf, carries the truth with it.